Yeah,
Welcome, everybody. We got a lot of people adding in. I'm here with Ben Ulansey. We're going to have a pretty good conversation. You want to plug anything for yourself about what you got going on? Any
um,
shameless plugs to start the show?
so I'm the owner of the Gen Z Report publication, which is a pretty loose smattering of cultural topics from entertainment to politics to whatever the hell else I want to cover. And it's been a lot of fun so far. It's not the most organized endeavor, but I love writing.
Yeah, well, join the club. I was actually writing until like 4 a.m. last night. I just couldn't fall asleep. And, sometimes I think, well, if I'm going to just lay in bed and stare at the ceiling, I might as well be up and watching or writing and doing something productive.
Yeah, the thing about writing is
But
that the inspiration comes when it comes, and I just try not to
yeah,
fight it. Like if I'm able to get
that's
to a
very true.
computer, I do it. So sometimes that is at 3 in the morning, but
Yeah. Do you watch or do you write anything like scripts, stories, or you stick mostly with the kind of cultural political commentary, like the more serious thoughts that you do?
I think one of the downsides that I've experienced with Substack is feeling like I need to shy away from some of those more creative endeavors. Not only because
Yeah.
it's hard to create an audience for serialized fiction, but because I feel like you kind of do have to hone down on these are my specific topics. And yeah, I do wonder sometimes whether certain things will go over well with my
Yeah.
audience.
Do you ever wonder if your audience is captured kind of or something?
Sorry, what was that?
That's I guess a fear in the internet age. Do you ever worry if you're like audience captured or anything like that? Like if you switch it up too much, the people
Yeah,
won't stick with you? Okay,
yeah.
yeah. Everyone,
As
yeah.
as my following has grown a bit, I've definitely noticed a bit of fall off when certain types of articles go up. Anything that's
Yeah.
not quite far left leaning enough, I think scares away certain people.
Yeah, not far left. Yeah, speaking of that, that's some things we're going to talk about. But first up, I guess we can get to the news. A lot of news. I've actually been working this job like every single day for the last 2 weeks. So I haven't been that productive writing because it's kind of hard to write after working this job that I'm doing. But a lot of news, a lot of kind of fascist updates, unfortunately. But I had a thought, it takes me back to the Biden era, all this beef between Stephen Miller and AOC about his like 4'10", his height, which I guess I looked it up. He's actually 5'10". I was like, is he really short? But, it's obviously a joke. And that's kind of the whole premise of the thing is like when you have these fascist demagogues trying to look like big, tough guys, you got to make fun of them and make them look like small, weak men, right? So it seemed to be effective. Like Fox News got in on it. Jesse Waters was defending Stephen Miller. And I think Jesse Waters has like in recent months, called talked about how sexy Stephen Miller is, which I mean, do you understand that at all? like, like I
It's
don't mean
fun,
to judge people, but like Stephen Miller could not be cast better as like a Nosferatu vampire type,
right?
like
Right.
meets like Heinrich Himmler from like the Third Reich, you know?
Oh, Stephen Miller's playing Nosferatu. Wow, great casting.
Yeah. I saw that movie, I definitely thought Stephen Miller the whole time.
Right.
But what did you make of his plenary comment or whatever, where he was talking about how the Trump administration will have plenary authority, which you look up that word, kind of an obscure word, but it means like the government has like total control over everything and cannot be questioned. And then he did that thing where he froze and he pretended like he couldn't hear or like the screen froze. But any reactions to that?
Yeah, this administration is definitely starting to lean more and more authoritarian, and yeah, people in his orbit keep trying to defend each and every action that he does, regardless of how much of an overreach it is. And I think that this
Yeah.
is just more of that. And you've seen a lot of it since this whole government collapse situation has started, where people would just say, "Oh, it's the government, the president who has complete control." Da da da. But having three branches of government all skewing Republican and trying to pin this all on the Democrats is just not really working quite as well as I think they'd hoped it would.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, the big news is the government's literally shut down right now. So that's silly. But it is ironic too. Yeah, they control the entire government, both chambers of Congress, the presidency, and they can't make a deal to keep their own government open. And I did like Trump's threats, like before the shutdown, he was threatening like, well, I'm going to fire all these employees and not bring them back if the Democrats don't make a deal. And I like right away, I was like, okay, deal, make that deal, call his bluff. It's his own government. He's going to fire all these people so that his own government can't accomplish things. Like, you don't got to tell me twice.
Yeah.
So I'm glad Democrats did stick with that. Do you think? How do you think the politics of the shutdown are working? I feel like Democrats are going for them better than expected. which I didn't expect much because they're not the most with it group right now.
That is what the polling at least seems to show. So I'm encouraged by that. I think that this government shutdown has been a another proof for me of just how difficult the inner machinations of government are to understand. And trying to read up on reconciliation bills and the nuclear option and all that, it's just so wildly far above the head of the average American that I feel like there are very few people who actually can grasp what's going on right now.
Yeah. I think about that a lot. Like a lot of my friends are not very political, and I kind of like it that way because I just write so much about politics. So it's kind of nice to have friends that like don't care or don't know. And that, aside from the ethical issues of not paying attention to like the destruction of our democracy, but it is kind of refreshing. But like most people that aren't on Substack all day probably don't really know what the filibuster is, for instance, and they wouldn't necessarily care or like even get the news if Republicans killed it and then just started voting everything they wanted on simple up down votes in the Senate. And I guess, that's where the Senate has to have 60 votes to pass things in the Senate for anyone watching that maybe doesn't know. Um, but how do you feel about it? I've always kind of been on the side of, you know what, maybe we should get rid of the filibuster. Maybe every time we have an election, the voters should get everything they want. And then the next election, it's a referendum on it. Now, granted, hopefully, you don't destroy the entire government and end democracy with, in that 2 year period before the next party gets a chance to have a free and fair election to undo everything that happened. But I don't know. I think Republicans have long benefited from saying crazy things that they know they'll never have to legislate on, like really ending abortion and doing a lot of their really draconian things. And I don't know, maybe their voters need to feel the pain for once. And maybe that would be healthier for our politics if like the Democrat or, politicians in general actually can do what they say they're going to do. But I don't know, any reactions to that?
Yeah, the filibuster, I think, is one of the funniest rules of our government. I think that given that it's probably a bit more useful for the Democrats than Republicans these days is
Hmm.
makes me reluctant to get rid of it now. But in general, it feels like a pretty strange and archaic rule that you can just talk endlessly,
Yeah.
and that prevents.
Yeah.
It's
Emphasis on rule because it's not in the law.
yeah.
It's like literally just a handshake agreement every 2 years when they make a new Congress. Um, but I don't know. Would you take that bet of just like, well, let's just let Republicans go wild until November, and then maybe we'll have an election that actually kind of reacts to the things that they try to do with no filibuster?
I'm not sure if I've got a great answer to that right now. It's I for the time being, I'm glad that the filibuster is an option that we have. I know that Cory Booker was able to
Hmm.
utilize it well, but it's the way that you saw it used during the Obama administration by Republicans was just
Yeah.
absurd. And it really does feel like a pretty archaic rule in a lot of ways. I've never quite understood how that ended up becoming part of our government.
Yeah, and Democrats did not kill the filibuster when they had power. So
Yeah.
far, John Thune and Republicans have not killed it yet. Although they do keep chipping away at it, like with the Supreme Court justices. Obviously, there's a couple other bureaucratic things that they've taken it away for. Like they just did this big batch of Trump nominees, or I guess judges or whatever it was that were like Democrats were successfully holding up for quite a while. But I don't know. Would you say, let's say the midterms happens, Democrats take back like the House or the Senate? Should they get rid of the filibuster and just go wild, even if Republicans don't? In the next year and a half, or I guess year at this
I'm
point, we're getting close to the midterms.
I haven't done a great job at grappling with what all that would entail down the road, but I'm tempted to say yes just because it feels like such a silly thing. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's hard to know how that would ultimately play out if we did get rid of it completely. I think that there is a reason why
a lot of
we've
hearts
kept it
going
this
on for
long,
this.
even I think there's maybe probably a good reason why politicians have kept it all this time, even if it is archaic. But yeah, I've never seen a ton of sense in that rule myself.
Yeah, I guess to steel man it, it is just one more veto point in our
Yep.
government that allows our democracy to not go too unstable and wobbly because it is a extra checkpoint, especially in the Senate, which already has a natural Republican majority just because of the makeup of our states and these like rural small states that get, as equal representation in the Senate as California does, even though LA alone has like as many people as like 20 states. So Republicans are essentially getting 40 senators for the population equivalent of LA, which gets two, or
Right.
shares two with the rest of California. So our government's not quite representative. I don't know. One big thing for Democrats to get rid of the filibuster is just to immediately try to bring in Puerto Rico and DC as states. Maybe even bring in Puerto Rico. It's like two states or something, right? There's the North and South Dakota with very teeny tiny population. I think Puerto Rico has like 6 or 8 million people, so quite a bit more than both Dakotas. So I don't know. Should we play hardball? Should Puerto Rico be brought in as 16 states or something like ridiculous? But hopefully they go for that. Democrats had the opportunity when Obama came in with that giant, 60 seat majority in 2008. And Democrats always trying to play nice and, bring the pillow to the gunfight. And they decided not to make either of those priorities. So how different would America be today had they done that and been successful? I don't
Yeah.
know.
It is strange to look back on just how unsuccessful the Obama administration was in many regards, despite that colossal majority that they had. So
Yeah, that's an
it's
interesting statement. Would you say, are you like almost like, how would you grade Obama now all these years in the future, knowing what we know that happened because of the things he did or didn't do?
So I guess unsuccessful is a bit of an overstatement, but the whole 2008 loftiness around the Hope campaign, I don't think that many would agree that he really did live up to that. And it wasn't entirely his fault because he was working within the system we have, and he faced some pretty colossal opposition from the Republicans in Senate. But yeah, he campaigned with so much hopefulness, and people really thought this was just going to be a revolution. And I think if we'd gotten all we wanted out of it, it would have closed the door to the possibility of Trump's taking office.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, certainly there's that racial backlash. I feel like, especially culturally, I have a very positive opinion of Obama. And I've been thinking about this that, like, can you hear me actually? I'm getting a little notification that my connection is
Yep.
stable.
I can,
Can you hear? Okay.
right as you said that, I started to get a little bit of
Let's
interference on
see.
your end.
There we go.
But you seem good now.
Okay. I'm good. Okay, perfect. But I've been thinking about this quite a bit actually, because there's actually, Gen Z is a little more real. My connection isn't too bad. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's
Can you hear me? Am I frozen again?
you're getting a little bit of
Okay.
roboticism in your
A little
voice, but
wobbly. Okay. Um, but yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because Gen Z is a little more conservative than millennials, and millennials are, especially millennial white men, are like the most kind of like, or not the most, but a very committed like liberal vote in a way that is not matching trends among like Gen X, which shifted kind of hard right. Gen Z is shifting a little bit hard right, but the millennials that grew up in the and came of age in the 8 years of Obama's presidency, certainly are a little more idealistic than the rest of the population. And even Kamala Harris, had a disproportionate millennial white male vote. But I think that Obama really did have that like idealistic effect on America for many years, and unfortunately, Trump is obviously undoing that. But what do you make of the commentary that like Gen Z women are actually more than other generations dating like the next generation up, like millennial men, just because Gen Z boys have kind of gotten red pilled, being super online with Andrew Tate and and obviously Donald Trump being president for most of their kind of like coming of political consciousness. But I find that, kind of fascinating that like the genders it's kind of a generation divide between the genders. Any thoughts
yeah,
on that?
yeah, I hadn't heard that before you mentioned it, and was really amused to do a little bit of reading on that issue because it makes all the sense in the world why women would feel the need to date up in the age bracket. Because I feel like it's must be such an interesting psychological thing to grow up and the first image that you have of a president is Donald Trump, and when you go online, what you see is Andrew Tate and the age of
Yeah.
reels and all that. So
Yeah.
it does make a lot of sense. I think that in many ways I'm very, very thankful that the first real image in my adult-ish life of a president was Barack Obama. But I did actually grow up a little bit during the Bush days, and all I remember
Hmm.
of that is my parents talking about, "Oh my god, it's so ridiculous that a president could be this awful. Look how stupid he is." And we always brought up the "Is our children learning?" quote, and now it just
Hmm.
feels so tepid by comparison when you think about every
Yeah,
stupid little thing
quaint.
that
I'd like to
right,
vote for George W. Bush after Trump. You know what I mean?
yeah. And
But yeah, yeah.
I've read some quotes from Bush in the last couple years, and he seems just absurdly sensible by comparison. Like he
Oh yeah, yeah, for
wasn't
real.
was not that deeply inarticulate. Really did harp on some things that weren't actually that awful. The kind of gaffes that most people make in life.
Yeah. And I think I may have talked about this in our last talk, but there is a lot of kind of like reassessments of George W. Bush, especially if you can compartmentalize Iraq and Katrina, which were obvious, just like, obviously destroyed his legacy. His administration led to the giant Obama swing in 2008 and like the giant Democratic swing in 2006. But, he did do a lot of things. The FEMA is basically all him reacting to Katrina, and they didn't really have a plan in the government before that. And now we do, although Trump's dismantling that. Like a lot of the charity and AIDS and all of the USAID stuff was kind of all George W. Bush. He really did have that compassionate conservatism that like on the side did actually, solve some good problems around the world. But I mean, obviously you can just never, forgive the debacle that Iraq became and taking our eyes off of Afghanistan and just having these, 2 decade long forever wars simultaneously. Just not a good thing for a government.
Yeah, I'm forgetting what the precise numbers are now, but his approval rating among Democrats like tripled or quadrupled in the years since he left office, and
Oh,
it really
really?
does make
Yeah.
sense.
Well, good for you, George. Yeah. Maybe that's some good advice for Trump if he leaves office and is still alive, maybe just do something simple like painting and stop being a giant bitch, you know?
Right. That
And
would
then
be
kind of going
amazing.
with the generational thing. I've been thinking about this a lot too. That obviously the postmortems of the election and Kamala Harris losing, and you can obviously throw in Hillary Clinton losing, but kind of the Democratic Party losing a lot of stalwart like union votes, losing a lot of like blue collar male votes. It wasn't that long ago where Democrats were like the working man's party and whatnot. But I find this interesting because, especially right now, Democrats, they're, I feel like a little Puritan, and we're having all these litmus tests of like who is a real Democrat, and even things like Democratic officials will say one thing or have a podcast with a conservative or Republican, or go on Fox News and be a little conciliatory. But then it's like so many Democrats want to just throw them out of the tent completely, and you have like one transgression and you're out forever. And it's obvious like that's obviously having an effect on why, especially like, if we want to take the white male demographic, is so hardcore leaving the Democratic Party. And, I am very liberal millennial white male. I will vote straight ticket Democrat for like pretty much my entire life because I just started voting, 2008, I think was my first, or yeah, my first election that I voted in. So straight Democratic ticket. I mean, look at everything I write and all the comedy I do. You're not going to really find a person like more credentially liberal than me. But on the other hand, I see that the Democratic Party like really does not talk to white males. And I'm
Yeah.
not like a dumb, selfish bitch where I'm going to be like, they don't talk to me. I'm red pilled. I'm voting Trump and Republican now. Men's rights, that kind of thing. But like, the more you look at it, you have to agree that Democrats really are not interested in like white male, especially like working class, like these kind of traditional Obama Trump swing voters. They're really not talking to those voters. And, it's obviously bad for elections because you need those voters to win. Like white people are still a slight majority of the country or plurality. Males are half the population. But do you have any thoughts on that? Just kind of like, do you feel like you're left behind by the Democratic Party, or do you think they should do more to like not like just kind of act like white males have no problems, and if they have a problem, it's totally their fault and fuck them. We don't need their vote. We don't want their vote.
Yeah, I feel like it's frustrating sometimes how we campaign so much on being the party of inclusivity. But when it comes to people who disagree on any one issue or do any type of reach out across the aisle, we very quickly let our exclusive side show. And I
Yeah.
experienced the brunt of this very recently with an article I put up. I think I called it "Not All Trump Supporters Are Evil." And one of the very first comments that I got was
And
this.
people immediately react like, fuck you.
Right. No, seriously. One of the very first comments that I got on it was this all caps reply, just going off and listing all the horrible things Trump had done and saying, if you supported him, you're worse than evil. And then they told me that I should stop writing. And it just really goes to show
Yeah.
because like you, I have voted left my entire life. I've never voted for a single Republican. And for me to say anything that suggests that, hey, maybe it could be useful to talk to someone we disagree with, people meet that with such hostility
Yeah. Right.
sometimes.
Yeah, I absolutely hate that. And I've written about this before. You lose every argument you don't participate in. You lose every debate you do not belong in. Like how much of the buzz of the election was Kamala Harris wouldn't go on Joe Rogan, wouldn't go on like Theo Vaughn or whatever. And it's like you just need to be in those spaces. You need to talk to those people, especially now with the media so fragmented. People like, if you're huffing Fox News all day, you're not seeing the Democratic Party's like lame tweets that they do. You're not seeing Chuck Schumer's videos where he's like trying to look tough now that everyone's like, you're not the man for the moment, and things like that. But what do you think? Hold on, I had one more note here. Um, I mean, I guess I like to think of this in terms of like forever, like the Democratic Party has been talking about how like, Black women are really kind of the backbone of the Democratic Party and kind of the most like sane, like, moderate voters. And they're um, very strategic, even like voting for Hillary in the primary for many months until Obama really took over. I feel like, Black voters, like by necessity, are like just the most pragmatic voters in America, especially Black women. And then, not to toot our own political side's horn, but like, there's a reason I think Black women vote like Democrat, but somewhere between like 92% and 98% or something like that, like every election pretty reliably. But I guess for the start of this point, I would like to throw in millennial white men. We're a good vote too. We're more liberal than the average. We didn't swing so far hard right. But you definitely get the kind of cliche that like the Democratic field offices and all the party apparatchiks are like young women and gay men, and like there is this like the kind of country music listening Republican flirting like white male like working class voters is just like the Democratic Party kind of doesn't have a message for them. And again, don't cancel us. I will always vote Democrat right now. I'm just calling it as I see it. Um, but we both watched the Ezra Klein, Ta-Nehisi Coates interview, right? What was your thoughts on that? Because that made a lot of waves and very much on this topic that we're discussing.
So I understand a little bit of why that generated controversy when you consider the way that he spoke positively about Charlie Kirk. But what he said wasn't really about the substance of Kirk's debate, but as much as his willingness to speak to people he disagrees with. And I think that Charlie Kirk was racist and sexist, and that his rhetoric did pretty much invite the fate he ultimately met, which is a distinct stance from saying that he deserved to die. But
Oh yeah,
if you're preaching that gun violence is a necessary price to pay for the Second Amendment, and then you die because of unfettered access to gun control,
yeah,
there's a what did they say? Live by the sword, die by the sword element to that. But
yeah,
what Klein was admiring in Kirk was the ability to at least speak to people that you disagree with, and that's something that I don't think that the
yeah.
way that Kirk handled that was very good. I think he argued in bad faith, but
Yeah, and then he went
it's
to colleges to just
yeah,
debate people 10 years younger than
yeah,
him and try to dunk on them because they're just not wise to the world yet.
yeah, but yeah,
Not
but
the
when
first fight.
but when you consider just how many people in the country are just completely closed off to the idea of ever speaking with somebody on the other side of the aisle, I do think that there is some merit in the ability to at least have those conversations. Um, yeah, again, this is the furthest thing from me saying that I in any way admire Kirk, but I do very strongly believe that it's been useful for me in my own life to have conversations with Trump supporters. And it's a very common talking point among Democrats that, oh, everyone who voted Trump 2, 3 times in a row is a cult member and can never be reached, and there's no reason to talk to them. But I've found on quite a few occasions that these conversations can lead to useful points of mutual agreement. And um, just in the last couple of days, I've had conversations with Trump supporters online who were replying to my article, and we didn't necessarily got to a point where we were able to agree with one another, but just civility of our conversation was a reminder that no, not everybody in the MAGA movement is a seething maniac, and it's by design that so many of these people were pulled into the movement. It was one of the most virulent misinformation campaigns that's ever been waged, and it makes sense that so many people were pulled into it. I
Yeah, no, that's true. And people definitely get like the red pill equivalent of like watching Fox News all day or just not really having access to like, liberal commentators or pundits.
yeah
Um, but I do think there's always an annoying double standard too. Like obviously Hillary Clinton got so much beef for her deplorables comment, which not a great comment leading into the election. Not good to call a big portion of the electorate ostensibly votes that you want and think should vote for you, like calling them deplorables and kind of like unsalvageable. Um, However, it's like such a double standard because that's literally what Trump and Republicans do all day. Fox News is just constantly talking
yeah
about how Democrats are evil and godless and heathen and our cities are on fire and everyone dies. If you step foot in Chicago, you'll die. You'll get murdered and mugged. And so like there is such a double standard where like like Trump is just talking nonstop about vermin and scum and using all
yeah
these like extremely dehumanizing terms. But like Republicans just get the pass always of like, well, that's what they always do. But did you hear a Democrat said that like Trump
yeah
voters are stupid, after Trump's like talking we should all be arrested and like shot for treason, like
right.
I guess now politically they're trying to like do these bombings of like these Venezuelan votes and like take the drug war into like warfare, and then how long is it until he starts droning liberals in the streets for being Antifa? I don't know. you
Yeah,
know
whenever Republicans point out the those occasional bad statements, or even
yeah
more than occasional bad statements from Democrats, I have to wonder, like, do you guys actually read the things that Trump tweets and see the things that he says? And I think that so often the answer just is
yeah
no. Like what they see from Trump are the few reels where he says something reputable, and the way that he's covered on Fox News and
yeah
comports himself in a vaguely civilized way, and they don't see the seething maniacal Trump who calls us all vermin and says that
yeah no, that's true
radical
too.
left needs to face their comeuppance, and except
Right.
he doesn't know the word comeuppance, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, it used to be up until like roughly the 80s or whatever that the college educated voters swung Republican. But now it's like the higher educated you are, you're swinging drastically liberal. You're the most
Yep,
liberal person in the country. So, I mean, there is something to be said for that like some of Trump's biggest supporters are the ones who pay the least attention to the news and know the least and understand history and sociology and civics the least. But
I love the
I did have
poorly
a,
educated. I love the poorly
yeah,
educated.
right. I did have I took a screenshot of a good post. It's a picture of a farmer that's complaining about like the soybean situation and the tariffs, like just decimating American farmers' export markets. So China is no longer buying all our soybeans and pork, and now we're bailing out Argentina for like $20 billion while Argentina is getting all these contracts. Our farmers are losing to China, and China's boycotting our crops and meat. So, there's a guy that, probably voted for Trump 3 times, like probably most of these farmers. I think it's like 78% was one fact I looked up that the farming community voted for Trump. And so, listing all these things and the comment that was really struck my interest was I genuinely feel so in despair about our country because I bet this guy would still vote Trump again given the opportunity. And I don't know how you fix that. And that's so poignant. It's like we have all these wedge issues with like guns, Christianity, the Bible, all these wedge issues and culture issues, the culture wars the conservatives are constantly ginning up. And here Trump is, Republicans, they are straight up destroying our farm industry. These soybean farmers are all, like they're all these small farmers that are already barely holding off against the conglomeratization and the super corporatization of all the farms, buying up all the small farmers. And, their kids aren't, necessarily wanting to be farmers all the time. So they have to sell for that. And now they're barely profitable. And these, it's all the regulations and all of the tax cuts and tax code changes, always that Republicans do are always benefiting the giant oligarchic corporations, that want to, collect all the farmland completely and have no small farmers. And that guy's still going to vote Republican. And like, what do you do? Where Trump will destroy this guy's livelihood and he'll get, a fourth Trump vote, Trump destroying the Constitution and running for a unprecedented third term in this modern age. And this guy will still vote for him. What do you make of that? Is there hope?
I do have a hard time squaring the idea that people do eventually leave cults with the notion that if this country were in apocalyptic tatters, I think that there would still be a significant faction of people supporting him. And I try to pick my battles when I do have conversations with Trump supporters because some of them I do have to recognize are just too far gone to be worth my time. And yeah, it's tough sometimes because I do believe in conversation, and I have seen instances where people who are swept into this cult for an entire decade do ultimately walk away from it. But it's so rare that it's hard to know when it's going to happen and how we should marshal our efforts. But yeah, it's not necessarily an end state when somebody has been a Trump supporter for this long. There are still those few people who are capable of being reached, and so many of
Yeah.
these people who have been with him this whole time, it's because the only people in their lives that they know are Fox News watchers, and they pull them back in the second that they start to have doubts. And
Yeah.
I think that the sheer number of people who supports Trump ends up being a kind of self-perpetuating thing where if another cult did things that were so absurd, they wouldn't be able to take strength in numbers in the way that he does. But yeah,
Yeah. The recent post my most recent post at the Halfway Cafe, also with that photo that I was talking about, also has a TikTok from a lady, Bella Vandala, but talking about how like this is, your Trump voters are getting what they voted for, like the farmers, they kind of voted for this. Trump
yeah,
said he was going to do the tariffs. He was going to do the trade war, be tough on China again. China is like this giant buyer. They have such a giant population and need to import a lot of food, so they need to buy it, and it's good if they're buying it from us and keeping our farmers afloat. But how much sympathy do you think people like that farmer deserve? That like they did all of these votes, they have this, it's their guy in control, just shredding their industry. Like how much empathy do we have for them? Because it's obviously a provocative video where this lady's like, no, fuck that guy.
yeah.
I don't have any empathy. We told him this would happen. We told him Project 2025 was coming. They intended to do all this bullshit that's affecting everyone's lives. And then you said it was a hoax. You said it wasn't true. You
Yeah.
believed Trump when he said he didn't know any of these people. Then he hires all these people and they're doing Project 2025. And it's like, you fucking voted for it. Don't complain to us. It's already like blue states, higher taxation, higher budgets, higher GDP output. It's all the big cities that have all the economic growth and activity in this country that bails out. It's going to bail out these farmers when Trump inevitably has to give them the $20 billion that now China is spending in Argentina soybeans or meat or whatever. Like how much empathy do we have to have? Should we bail them out? Isn't this just socialism? Are we giving these farmers handouts and making them dependent? Should we be as tough on them as they are constantly about like the handouts in the cities and welfare and food stamps and all of that?
I guess my answer there would be empathy in general is a useful thing to be able to practice, but I don't fault one bit the people who are incapable of offering it right now. And in
Yeah.
so many cases, I'm not able to offer that empathy. For the people who earnestly believe that liberals should be executed, and yeah, there's no use in trying to empathize with those people. But for the ones who are otherwise kind to people and were just pulled in by a campaign of misinformation, I do try to exercise empathy when I can, and it's kind of tricky sometimes to parse out who's who between those factions. But in general, I try my best to exercise empathy when it comes to these people who it does earnestly seem like they aren't evil people deep down and were just pulled in by what Trump and his allies really designed and orchestrated to be one of the biggest misinformation campaigns of all time. It's very unprecedented to have a platform as big as Twitter weaponized, and it's that's I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm capable of looking at our modern circumstances and thinking how that affects our current situation. Because in the past, Twitter didn't even exist, and it wouldn't be possible to domineer someone's media consumption in the way that Elon and Trump and his allies did. So yeah, it really is a tough thing to answer, and I don't believe that the people who are the most deeply embattled by what's going on right now, it should fall on them to exhibit empathy. But I guess it falls on people like us to be more empathetic because we're the white males and we aren't as deeply affected as some by some of Trump's policies. And I'm fortunate to be in a position where I can exhibit that empathy, and I don't fault people
Yeah.
who can't.
Yeah, and that's kind of the empathy of regular people too. Like, like you said, like as a white male that's like relatively like stable financially, the government doesn't really affect me, which is why it's sad. Like somebody in the comments was referencing like or asked like what do you make of the Hispanic and black Trump voters that like, Trump doesn't give a fuck about those people, especially if you're Hispanic right now, like going out of your way to like straight up discriminate against you and judge you by the color of your skin and maybe just arrest you on the street because they got these quotas with this horrific immigration status. But it's sad too, like being like the white stable male that government doesn't affect me, but I'm trying to convince these people that government does affect. Like vote
Yeah.
for your fucking interests. Like I'm the one that can skate free and probably go the next 3 years not really being directly affected by a lot of this more insane shit. Like I'm not getting targeted on the street by ICE. I don't live in a like giant city. I'm not rich. Like just most of the government just does not affect me. It affects people on the margins, and it's so sad to be like that reliable liberal voter of just like vote the party that is I could rant forever, but but maybe kind of going back to the Ezra Klein thing and the
Yeah.
controversy over his interview. I'm just so struck by like the people like we were talking about the puritanicalism of like Democrats that like people want to throw out Ezra Klein from the tent now. Like Ezra Klein's irredeemable and everything he posts now. Like you're a piece of shit, Ezra Klein. And it's just like, what are we doing? If Ezra Klein is
Yeah.
not liberal enough to be in our big tent, like we will never win an election again. You need people like Ezra Klein. It's like. And he's got this giant podcast, all of these well thought out things. He's really a thought maker, a thought setter, really, and trendsetter, like in democratic and liberal politics. And it's like the idea that like he's now irredeemable and out of the tent, and we got to cast him out and shun him and exile him. You sent me an article talking about how Democrats are kind of the mean girls, where they have all this politics and commentary on inclusion and making everybody feel comfortable. But if you disagree on one of our long list of 3,000, official Democratic opinions, if you're not with us on every single one of them, you're out. You're worse than Hitler. You're problematic, and never talk to us again. Get off threads. Totally get out of our. It's like we can't win elections that way. And that was part of his conversation where Ezra Klein is like very into government and elections and like having coalitions. And as a as a political party, it's your job to make a bigger coalition, get more votes than the other party, and win. And we're not doing that. So it's like we need to have those discussions on how do you win elections. It's not just upturn the table and start boycotting everything and never talk to a Republican ever again. Stop talking to all your friends and family. Isolate yourself like a monk in your little apartment of moral purity where you'll never vote for a Democrat because they'll never be pure enough for you. Like that is not how you win elections. That's not how you help all these people that actually get fucked over by the fascists when they take over because you check out and boycott the election, boycott the party that agrees with you way more than the other.
Yeah, it's one of the most dangerous times to turn toward that mean girl politics type of thinking where you say, "You're not a Democrat, you're not a Democrat, and if you
Yeah.
don't believe in this, then you're not a Democrat." And I see so much of that. And I think that in many ways Trump has pulled that out of us in that we're all so scared and reactive right now that it's easy to feel like if you're not with us on all of these points, then you're against us. But at the same time, when the threat of
Well, that
Trump
means
is as
everyone's
huge.
against us then,
Yeah. But yeah, when the threat of Trump is as huge as it is, it just isn't a very useful time to start pushing people out of the party. And I do
Yeah.
ultimately yearn for a system where we have more than two parties. And ideally, I think that we would have a moderate conservative movement, and I guess I don't want there to be an extremist conservative movement, but I want there to be multiple parties for the people to choose from, and
Yeah.
yeah, a moderate Democrat Party and a super progressive Democrat Party, and the fact that we have this two-party system, it just keeps pushing each of us to further and further extremes. And I used to feel as though the Democratic Party was pretty moderate in the overall scheme of things, but as this mean girl politics trend has taken hold, it does feel in a lot of ways like there is a real element of extremism on a certain side of this party.
Yeah, but how do you undo that? Because of the first past the post system, you just two political parties that are bipolarly opposed to each other is kind of inevitable. And maybe we'll get so far crazy that we'll have a pendulum swing back to like more moderation from both parties.
Yeah.
But like if you look at a chart of like the radicalism of both parties, like there's a few Democrats that you would consider maybe radical, like the Squad, like more socialist leaning people, but like compared to Europe, they're like still center left. But then you look at Republicans and from like the Tea Party on through the House Freedom Caucus, and like,
Yeah.
like almost as much as a third of Republicans are like really radical to the point where like, wanting Trump to run again and maybe even be a monarch, like they really don't have that much interest in elections, certainly not free and fair ones, that would make them lose. So what do you do with that disparity where the radicalism is just so like non-linear and just really on like leaning heavy on one side of the spectrum?
I guess keep quietly yearning for a better system to take hold, but not expecting that to happen in this decade or possibly
Well,
not
you'd
even
have to have
in
like
my lifetime.
constitutional change, right? You'd
Yeah,
have to
we
have some
would.
kind of
Yeah.
constitutional convention and literally change the constitution, to have some kind of like proportionate system or something. I don't know. The way our Congress works, you can only have two parties, and if one party splits into two, well, congrats, that side of the spectrum lost, and you get the
Yeah.
complete other side.
One thing on which most Democrats and Republicans can agree is that the system we've always had is broken. And for the people who voted for Trump's explicitly because they wanted the system that we have to disintegrate, I there's a certain empathy that I can have there because my entire life I've known that the two party system that we have is broken, and I don't think that it's on this current body of elected officials to fix that. But when everyone can agree that what we have isn't working, it does speak to some real systemic problems. And
Yeah.
I've felt for a while like we really do need a better government, but that's just such an incredibly lofty and faraway goal that it's hard to imagine how we would get there without civil war or anarchy.
Yeah, somebody mentioned in the comments ranked choice, and I think outside, like I'm probably not for a constitutional convention for us to like totally rewrite the Constitution, and like who knows how long that takes, and like
Yeah,
Republicans right now are not going to do that in good faith. Yeah, especially as they control both chambers of Congress. Definitely not a good time to let Trump take the lead in rewriting the Constitution. With his bully pulpit. But ranked choice would be fun. Alaska does that, and they just actually not this term, but the previous Congress had a Democratic representative for the first time in quite a while. Ranked choice makes some really interesting elections in a couple other states where just, the total dynamics, like with the New York City primary, that has been some interesting mathematics and strategizing. But I guess that's one way to do it. Each state could individually do ranked choice. You don't need a constitutional amendment or anything like that, and that might have like a big effect in like weeding out the really polarizing candidates that like
yeah.
both sides hate, and you'll have these surprise like moderate candidates. I don't think it's a bad thing if in Massachusetts occasionally a Republican will get elected to statewide office there, or like in the inverse, like Idaho would have a Democratic representative or senator occasionally. That might be a cool idea. Any thoughts on that?
It's a more attainable goal than starting from scratch with an entirely
Yeah,
new constitution.
yeah,
And
that's true.
yeah, I wish I could snap my fingers and see it happen. I imagine that it's a lot trickier than it sounds at face value, but it's certainly got to be easier than going through a civil war anarchy period just to get a new constitution.
Yeah. Kind of going one more thought on that, like Puritan, like thing in the Democratic Party, that kind of impulse that Democrats have. But Jake Tapper has been going through a lot of controversy. I think you flagged that, but he did that text interview with Trump, which was kind of weird. And then, of course, he wrote that book about Biden being senile, which compared to Trump right now is not a career move I would have made. Spending a year or two writing a book, like just lambasting one of our extremely old senile presidents and not the other. But any thoughts
Yeah.
on Jake Tapper's kind of controversies?
It's hard to say it's a one-to-one situation with Ezra Klein because I was a little bit more frustrated with Jake Tapper for what he did. But at the same time, I don't think it's useful to say Jake Tappers no longer belong in our party because we need every vote we can get permitted that democracy holds long enough for votes to count. But
Yeah.
it's also, I think it's a little more similar to Bill Maher in a lot of ways, because I think that he's brought on a lot of the ire that he's earned in the last few months. But at the same time, I think that it's very useful to have voices like him who are capable of calling
Yeah.
out the excesses of
Oh
both
yeah.
sides. There have been quite a few statements I've heard from him where I'm like, yeah, that's a really useful thing for you to point out, that
Yeah.
it's a double standard,
Right.
and
And he's
yeah,
the guy that's telling those liberals that have that impulse to strike out everybody, hey, fuck you. You're the
yeah,
fucking problem. Shut the
yeah,
fuck up. Like that's useful. I like Bill Maher a lot. I totally understand why people hate him, and he is kind of bitchy on his show a lot,
yeah,
and he's a little full of himself and annoying. So I totally understand why he grades
yeah.
people like totally the wrong way. However, like he's the only person that'll bring on Steve Bannon to his show. Look at Steve Bannon in the eyes and say, "You're evil, and you fucking know it.
Right.
We both know you know it." Like no one else in the media will do that. And you got to take some of his more insane takes about like he went off the deep end with COVID a little bit and some other things, but again it's that idea you don't have to agree with him on 100% of stuff to still think he's a good voice and he's doing a good thing for the media.
What's that one aphorism that people say? Take what you leave and or take what you like and leave the rest. I think it is, and I think
Yeah, right,
that applies very well to Bill Maher. Like, you don't have to agree with absolutely everything he says
right,
to understand the value in some of what he says, and
yeah,
I think there are uh, too many Democrats who see someone who says the occasional disagreeable point and says, "Oh, you no longer have a place in this party," and
right.
I think that there's just no more useless way of thinking right now.
Yeah. What did you make of Bill Maher's meeting with Trump at the White House, where again he got shunned so much for that comment, but I mean I felt like it was a fair comment of like
Yeah,
he was normal when I talked to him. He plays
yeah.
a fucking lunatic, and I hate everything he does politically. But like maybe he could have had a more nuanced statement about that like crazy shit. But I was curious what would you do if you went to? Would you accept a invitation to the White House to have dinner with Trump? And then what do you think you would ask him? Like how would you handle that differently than Bill Maher did?
I wrote an article about Bill Maher called "Why I Want to Believe Bill Maher" after he made that statement, and
Yeah.
I really, so much about what he said there really wasn't all that extreme. What he claimed was, this person who is an extremist and has said many fascist things on the air was able to put on a civil face when I met him. He didn't try to downplay the excesses of this administration or say that crazy isn't crazy, but he said that for the hour or two that I was with him, he was able to be civil and personable, and I don't think that Bill Maher was lying to our faces when he made that claim.
Yeah.
What I would do if I had a dinner with Trump, man, I think I would be in a similar position to how I often feel when I converse one on one with Trump supporters, where I'm just so overcome by all of the negativity of the last few years that I would hardly know where to begin, and just, oh, I could talk about this issue and this issue and this issue and
Yeah.
end up kind of just fumbling around a bit. But what I do believe is true of him is that it would be useful to concede a little ground and say, this is how we've fallen short in this way. But I think that you're doing these things that are objectively fascist and
Yeah.
dangerous for all of us. And yeah, appeal with a little bit of flattery before saying, hey, this is madness.
Yeah. I think about this a lot because like you watch like CNN clips and like kind of the legacy media, institutional media companies where like obviously it's so archaic now. The idea that you'd have like a 3-minute segment on the most pressing issues of the day, and then like they start saying something interesting. Sorry, we got to go to commercial break. But I would
Yeah,
love like to be on CNN or MSNBC if I was like a host. I feel like I was thinking about this. I would take it almost as if like you're stopping a fight on public transit between like two homeless people. I'm just like, stop. Why are you saying that? Why are you saying that to them? Why do you say that? Like, and just why are you doing that? And just almost like Socratically, just keep asking them why they're doing and what they're saying instead of just, here's a question. And then they give this canned answer
yeah,
that they memorize. And then you go on to the next question. No follow up and no like why, no delving deep into the soul of them of why they're saying such a like blatantly political thing. But like all of the legacy media is just like, well, commercial break.
yeah.
Thanks for coming, and we'll talk to you next time. When we want your just canned political answer for like. and it's like everyone kind of takes their jobs lazy, and everyone has a right to be lazy at work, right? But it's definitely lazier and worse for society when like media people don't take the opportunity. And I think I kind of have a bone to pick too with like a lot of these conservative, like especially podcast hosts that aren't smart and not capable of doing conversations. But like Theo Vaughn has no
Right.
business
Right.
talking to
Oh
Trump
my
before an
God.
election for a big election. Like what the fuck does he know? He's not even really that political. And again, I don't want to do the liberal thing of Theo Von's the worst. He like cast him out, never talk to him, boycott him. Like I think you are allowed to just realize people are fucking morons. Like same thing with like sports and like celebrities. Like I don't go to them for their political opinions. So if they're extremely liberal and annoying or extremely conservative and annoying, it's just like, okay, I'll see them in the movie, but I'm not it's not surprising to me when a NASCAR driver turns out to be a Trump supporter. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like I'm not going to NASCAR drivers for all of my political diet of the day. You know what I mean?
Theo Von is the podcaster that I've been the single most frustrated with, not because
Yeah,
he says things that are outwardly offensive, but just because, man, who handed this guy a microphone? But at the same time, who handed Donald Trump a presidency? I think that Theo Von
yeah,
is the Donald Trump of the podcasting world. So it makes a lot of sense that he
yeah.
had Trump on the show when you think about it from that perspective.
Right.
But at the same time, yeah, people who are so deeply unknowledgeable and inarticulate in general probably shouldn't be the ones that are able to get the president on their show.
Yeah. And at some point it's like just the kind of delusional aspect of people where like, oh, I could do that. If I'm successful at something, I must be a genius at everything. And like,
Right.
if I were Theo Vaughn, I would hopefully have the self-awareness to be like, I do not deserve to to be like the number one podcast interviewing like Kamala Harris and Donald Trump separately, right? In the last month of the election or something like that, right? It's like kind of knowing your time and place. Like think like someone like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, they're capable of, handling that and knowing
Yeah.
enough. And while it is a disservice to the electorate and the people and their own audiences, because like just softball questions that you don't know what's going on in politics or how the government works. But I don't know. I guess I'm ranting a little bit, but
On a
um,
slight Theo Von tangent, I
yeah,
saw this
yeah, go for it.
this one interview he did with this like 10-year-old influencer or something. I'd never even seen him before, but it was just such a
10-year-old
one-to-one
influencer.
conversation where they were just on the same exact mental level, and it was just so hilarious to me. But
Look for that. Send that to me or something, whatever you're looking at there. Um, I guess turning subjects, what do you make of Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of turning a little moderate and now coming out in favor of the Obamacare subsidies? And like she, I gotta say, in the last like this Congress, you don't see her in the news constantly saying
yeah,
extremely dumb shit and flinging proverbial feces at like our government. She's also hardcore, for the Epstein files coming out, even if I guess presumably Trump's in them, and like a bunch of big Republican people. So, what do you make of her kind of about face? Is it authentic? Do you think it's legit? Do you think she's had a change of heart with how kind of maybe insane she has been and contributing to the polarized government we have now?
when you think about how much Republicans allegedly care about the pedophilia issue, it makes sense that she's really harped on this, and it's been kind of strange to see so many people do an about face and say, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we really don't care about the Epstein files." Um, at the same time, I've been surprised at how many
Mhm.
Democrats who were completely silent about the Epstein issue during Obama's administration have suddenly taken on the rallying cry of "Release the Epstein files! Release the Epstein files!" I think it's should be something that we can all acknowledge as an objective societal good for us to
Yeah.
know who was on that list, and it's strange how much of a political issue it's become. But yeah, I feel like Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the only rational Republicans left when it comes to that issue, and it really speaks to just how much she actually did care about the pedophilia issue. And
Yeah. Well, did you see
I
Swalwell's statement that he thinks that like if they actually go through the vote, you're going to have just like 100 Republicans switch and vote for releasing it because they don't want to be on the wrong side of history and they kind of know that this is inevitable. and they're kind of like keeping the government shut down partially to prevent this from coming out. And they're not seating, they're using it to not seat that Arizona Democrat that won that special election, who would be the 218th vote and the last and final vote needed to release it outside of the power machinations of uh, Speaker Johnson.
I would so love to believe that Swalwell is right. I mean, I think that quietly they each know that they would be on the wrong side of history to vote against
Yeah.
that. But would it be more cowardly than voting against Trump's impeachment twice? It's on a pretty similar level of cowardice. I think that this is a
Yeah.
completely feckless
Right.
body of elected
Yeah.
politicians.
Yeah. You'd like to think though that like a vote to out the biggest child sex trafficking like ring in the entire country and maybe in American history wouldn't be such a who knows both sides kind of thing. But um and then let's see, with Epstein, did you have any reactions to the Pam Bondi and Cash Patel testimony last week? With them kind of like refusing to answer and dodging the question, and they're kind of like political bullshit, like Pam Bondi, like having a notebook just filled with like pivots to just attack the like ad hominem attacks on all of the Democratic representatives questioning her.
I actually didn't follow that story as closely.
Okay. Well, it went about as you'd expect.
Yeah.
Yash Patel getting stupid and not answering questions and just being militant and wasting, the representative's time. But Pam Bondi, I guess, in theory, has like seen the tapes of Epstein, seen photos. Allegedly, the FBI has like photos of Trump posing with like half naked underage girls, with Epstein. So, good legacy that she's building. Yeah. Like I don't know. What do you think that is? Is it just the obsession with power? She has a job and a paycheck that she's gonna do they have like, some kind of blackmail over her? Has she just been kind of in the Trump orbit for so long? She was like uh she was the attorney general of Florida. I don't know if it directly corresponded with like all the first time Epstein started getting in legal trouble, but certainly she has connections with Trump and kind of Florida politics like prior to his presidencies, I think, right?
Yeah, something I've wondered for a while is how many of these elected Republicans have gotten like mafia style threats where, if you vote against this, we're gonna come for you
Yeah.
type situation.
Well,
So
I have a theory that probably Trump has access to all of Epstein's blackmail, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's, I guess, like a barely kept secret that Epstein filmed all of this stuff and, invited people over to, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of like he was a foreign like agent or something with like Israel or something. I guess it could be, but,
yeah.
certainly he was, getting blackmail and like, where's all that blackmail? What did the FBI do with all of that? What about all the evidence from the cases prior with Epstein's like, sweetheart deal? What about all this stuff since, and then you have all the Epstein victims getting together now and they're like threatening to release all the names that they know. Which I don't know what's the holdup on that. Are they just waiting for Congress, I guess, to do it the official way before they kind of go Hail Mary as a last ditch effort to hold somebody accountable?
There's been a rumor for a while that they're just going to redact all the Republican names from the list and give the public just an exclusively Democratic Epstein list.
I hate
And
this world.
and and I'm honestly kind of surprised that hasn't happened yet because I feel like it wouldn't
Yeah.
really be that hard of a thing for them to
Yeah.
do.
And they could have done it a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
guess
just to
that's
appease all of the talk about this whole Epstein
right.
issue. All right, here's the files. It's only Democrats. Now stop
Yeah.
talking.
Not a single Republican. What a coincidence. Yeah.
Right, right.
It is funny that that is like the saving grace that like you do have to remember that these people are morons that have been promoted above their capacity to really serve in the jobs that they have. So we are kind of like Cash Patel. Do you think he's walking around like everyone's respecting him in the hallways of the
Right.
FBI? Pete Hegseth, does anybody, like that speech that no one clapped and he's got all these like canned lines where he's like holding for applause that won't come, thankfully these people are fucking idiots.
Yeah, if this is
um,
what fascist authoritarianism looks like, I'm thankful it's so goddamn
Well,
boring.
it has to be like this because you can't have authoritarian fascism with smart, capable people that will not lie and will not just go along with like the stupid, like charade that the demagogue is insisting upon. So
Yeah.
I think I wrote an article about this. Like, you don't really see long-lasting authoritarian governments unless they're like extremely brutal and just killing like thousands of their own people. But like it's inherently Pyrrhic because you fire all the smart people, the sane people, the people who will tell you the truth. Demagogues do not want to be told the truth. And then it's like Russia's a good example right now. All the lies about the military, about Ukraine, they go in, get curb stomped, and now they're not winning this war. And now Russia's like pulling troops back and having to defend, even Russian territory. So 3 years, the lies got them into a 3-year war because he's just surrounded by brown nosers. Everyone else got pushed out of buildings or poisoned. So I feel like fascist governments are inherently, they'll always collapse just because you only get fascism from brown nosing morons that care more about access to power, proximity, and money, or just being in the boys club kind of thing. That they're not competent at doing anything they really want to do. So, yay America! Hopefully,
It does feel like
um,
we've got a uniquely American form of fascism because
would you
historically, I
say
do.
America's is dumber than like Mussolini and Hitler? Like America is just our form of fascism is just inherently stupider than any other.
It does seem that way because I obviously you can't speak in any way positively of Hitler, but gosh, there really shouldn't be a but there. But when you hear his speeches,
But the
he is
Autobahn,
someone
Ben,
who is
the Autobahn.
charismatic and articulate, even if a deeply evil and genocidal human being. But yeah, to compare his speeches to Trump's, Trump seems far more bumbling and moronic than I typically
Yeah.
associate with the conniving fascists that we've often seen in the past.
Yeah, I think one saving grace for American democracy is that Trump got started so late on his political career of divisive demagoguery.
Yep.
Um, Speaking of that, I had this. This is just a like a thought experiment. Um, how would you steel man Trump? Like, you were talking about how like talking with Trump voters to give the most credible praise to Trump, or maybe just the most cogent um, explanation for what he's doing and why he's doing it. How would you steel man? Like, for instance, like I'll give a couple that came up with. He hasn't totally abandoned Ukraine, which I don't know why he hasn't, because it's very weird that he's not helping Ukraine, but he's also not totally fucking them over. We're still
Yes.
doing like military, maybe the military is just really taking the lead and keeping him from stopping that. But like, I guess you got to give some credit that he hasn't just totally pulled out and fucked Ukraine.
Yep.
And when I personally believe it's so in America's national security interest to have Ukraine curb stomp Russia, join NATO and the EU eventually, be a bulwark against, Russia's been trying to invade Europe for like literally 1,000 years, maybe, maybe not that long, but like since since they started coming into their own after the Mongol Empire, so like probably like 700 years. So I guess that's kind of good. Um, I'm not necessarily dying on this hill, but I had the idea that maybe it's a good idea that the United Nations kind of loses American leadership, and maybe we can come up with something better, because like it definitely has a 1945 structure and organization that really is not relevant anymore. And obviously it's not capable of stopping wars like in Gaza and Israel. It has no teeth because they have all these veto points with Russia, China, and the US that can just veto anything that any of them care about. So maybe it's good that it's like a forest fire, and like a next democratic president can maybe come up with or the UN itself can come up with a better system with a new structure. But how would you steelman the Trump second term?
I've returned a lot to the broken clock that's right twice a day metaphor when it comes to Trump, because I think that so many people on my side of the aisle refuse to acknowledge that the broken clock is ever right. But there
Yeah.
were the occasional things that weren't horrendous or were actually objectively good that have come from his time in office. I think that Operation Warp Speed, for example, had an incredibly silly name, but did fewer people die as a result of it? Yeah. I think that what's happening between Israel and Gaza right now is an objective humanitarian good. I think that Trump did it because he personally wanted the Nobel Peace Prize and doesn't actually have any empathetic interest toward the people of Gaza. But yeah, I'm not
That's
going
so
to
funny
say
that we
that
can
it's.
just dangle that carrot in front of him to do good things.
But yeah, I don't think that it's useful to argue like, oh, the Israel Gaza treaty is bad. And I have actually seen some Democrats try to make that point because they have such a hard time grappling with the notion that anything positive whatsoever could come from a broken clock.
Yeah. Um, I heard an interesting point. It was talking about how like Democrats just suck at like communication and like the political side of governing, and how like Biden like got more hostages freed than Trump's deal now. But like, even Democrats have memory hold that. And but I don't know. It's interesting on this subject. It's like, is that what do you make of the Biden administration's dealings in Israel with Gaza? Like for 2 years, Democrats couldn't stop it. They didn't kind of play hardball and say, we'll just revoke all funding. And now, like, I guess a lot of people are still blaming Democrats and Biden and even Kamala Harris ludicrously at events. Like they're going to protest Kamala Harris when she's not the president over Palestine.
Yeah.
But was this just like a giant political miscalculation, a swing and a whiff? How do you make of Democrats? And now, obviously, Trump's going to give himself all the credit. Republicans, the media are all going to give Trump credit, even though I'm sure he's not the one doing the like the tough negotiating, and he's not he's not taking homework into the White House every night and reading up on like what the latest deal negotiations are.
So I've been to Israel before, and I think that one of the things that surprised me the very most going there was that the people who were so deeply affected by the Holocaust could turn around and be so pretty
Yeah.
across the board pro-Trump. Like most Israelis that I spoke to could at least say a fair amount of positive about him. They were capable of grappling with the wrong, but yeah, so much Israeli leadership and so much of the citizenry there is pretty darn pro-Trump. And I think that the fact that a deal was able to be worked out here has much more to do with the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump and wanting to hand this victory to him to make him look good than it does any actual negotiation skills that Trump has.
Well, yeah, and I would say with all things Trump, the celebrations are very premature. Like this,
Yeah,
like let's give this
yeah,
deal like more than a day or two.
right.
I'm sure, like I don't think Netanyahu has any vested political personal interest in stopping this war, and having Israeli society go back to normal, where they can maybe throw him out of office and prosecute him. Um, the deal is again, it's like the thing Israel kind of always does, where they're making a deal with Hamas, which has been destroyed and is a terrorist organization that the rest of the world hate and does not really speak for all Gazans. So they're making this hardline deal for Hamas to agree to, where it's like a lose-lose for the Gazan people, because either Hamas accepts the deal, has some kind of still like power control structure within the deal, and fucks over the Gazan people and continues to oppress them, or Hamas, because they're fucking morons and idiots and like, terrorist sympathizers, they don't accept the deal. And then Israel still blames the Gazan people of like, oh, we tried to make a deal. The Gazans will never agree to anything, even though it's not really a good faith. There's not really a good civil, like political leadership representing Gazans who don't want to be bombed and don't want to kill Israelis and, that kind of thing. So I think we're definitely, I think Trump and his acolytes are definitely celebrating prematurely here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I went on Twitter earlier today, and it was kind of amusing to see the absolute field day that the Republicans were having with the Trump
Yeah.
Gaza news, and like, see, are you stupid libtards ready to admit yet that Trump is a savior for humanity? No, a lot of us are capable of acknowledging
Yeah.
that this is a good thing, and Trump is still a vile, evil human being and a fascist in his own country. But yeah,
Yeah.
we're not going to pretend this is bad. I don't expect that it's going to last in any meaningful way. There have been
Yeah.
a few times where there have been positive news stories that have developed during Trump's administration about possible ceasefires and deals being made, and
Yeah.
each time up to now, those have disintegrated. So we'll see what happens in a couple
Yeah.
weeks.
And I'm
And
not holding my breath. I mean, you look at photos of Gaza and it's just leveled
yeah,
cities. And it's
yeah,
like, is Israel going to fund new buildings for all the Gazans? Like, I have to
no,
imagine Israel is just going to plow the shit out of all that with like repave the roads, and all of a sudden you're going to have Israeli settlements, and Trump wants to have the Gaza Riviera or whatever. Like
right,
I imagine the outcome of this is not that Gazans are going to get a beautiful opulent new city full of funding and investments from the rest of the world and America, and Israel will really help rebuild in solidarity with the Gazan people. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
I'm very skeptical of like how this is going to play out for Gazans. They're just going to probably be kind of pushed into a even smaller range of like the territory that they have. But do you think this is good for Israel long term? Do you think this is bad for like Jews worldwide in terms of like having to like answer for, it's unfair obviously to expect like American Jews to answer for a country that they don't live in and a government they don't vote for and have no political participation in. But certainly, anti-Semitism is the enduring like bigotry form for like the last 2,000 years or longer,
Yeah,
going back to like ancient Egypt, I guess, enslaving them. But
yeah, it has been a shame how much of a driver of anti-Semitism the whole conflict there has become for just Jews worldwide who have no say whatsoever in what Israel does. I've been a kind of ashamed to see this anti-Semitic attitude take hold. Um, I Yeah, I think there's a good chance that this is going to be good for Israel long term, and that it just looks so horrible for Israel to keep committing war crimes. Um, and if nothing else, I can at least say that what Israel was doing was pretty darn evil and murderous, and in the war crime department. But given how long the conflict there has raged on, I can't say that I'm not understanding of the motives behind it. I think that the hostility has lingered for so many hundreds of years that it's much more complicated, for example, than the Russia-Ukraine issue, which I think is a much more simple, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys type of situation.
yeah. Do you have any thoughts on Russia and Ukraine? It seems like a lot of the news that I've been seeing is that Ukraine's like increasing the number of cities they're liberating now. Russia, like I mentioned earlier, there's reports that Russia is pulling troops back to their border because now like Ukraine's drone wall is just so fucking effective that they are just like obliterating like every Russian attack. And I have written like a 4,500 word article on why I think Ukraine is a good use of America's attention and money and funding and support. But I'm kind of very interested in seeing how far this goes. Hopefully Ukraine doesn't go insane and try to like steal a bunch of Russian land and keep the war going. But I don't know. What do you do? Like, does Putin have some kind of political falling out if like Ukraine gets back to their borders? Just seeing the draw. And again, obviously I'm seeing my algorithm is like very pro Ukraine. So I mean, obviously a lot of Ukrainians are dying every day too. But, the Ukraine's bombing Russia's oil refining infrastructure and like on a weekly basis like 2% of Russian like refined oil is like being taken off the market, so that is really starting to hurt Russia. And they, with the sanctions, they don't really have the parts or the capacity to kind of rebuild a lot of this stuff very fast. So I don't know, any thoughts on the end of that war because Ukraine fucking won it like the badasses that they obviously have
Yeah.
been.
Yeah, it's a really interesting underdog story because there were very, very few people who thought that Ukraine would hold out for even weeks, let alone months and years. And
Yeah,
it doesn't even seem like they are losing the war at this point. I think that the public
yeah,
sentiment is so deeply anti-Putin, and that I think Putin deep down has got to realize that whatever he wanted from this war
yeah.
has not been achieved, isn't achievable, and yeah,
It fucked Russia, man. You look at their demographics and their population
yeah.
decline they had before this, and like the shit life syndrome of like drug use, alcoholism, super low birth rate because no one has money for kids. And it's like really grotesque because right now with the war, they're essentially like bribing the Russian people with payments. You get a sign up bonus to go to the war, and then you get the bonus when you die at the war. So like they're really taking these poor people from like the provincial areas of Russia and basically just bribing their silence as like they're just sending all the young men of Russia and especially these more ethnically diverse, smaller, semi like autonomous regions of Russia just to the meat grinder.
Yeah, I'm I've been very surprised myself by the direction this has all gone. It really seemed at first like Putin and all of the powers that they had as a country were going to demolish Ukraine in a matter of weeks or months. But yeah, like I said before, I've been really pleased to see them not only hold on this long, but in many ways make the Russian military and country as a whole look pretty stupid for even attempting this.
Yeah. Um, let's see. I got just a couple more points before we probably let everybody go. What do you make of Qatar getting this airport, this like air base? And then Pete Hegseth said we're giving them an air base, and then JD Vance was saying that's not true, and he's doing his bullshit thing with the media where it's like the media is not trustworthy, even though Pete Hegseth had like a whole press conference like a bit about it. But is that America first in your eyes? Having a Qatari military air base in Idaho, like.
Right.
I guess from the Middle East, the West Coast is maybe closer to get to, but like, why Idaho? I don't know. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, the nepotism in that situation looks pretty darn plain for Trump to
Like the
get that.
Trump bribery kind of thing
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
plane and every. Yeah. So this is part two of their giant bribe the U.S. president deal.
yeah, yeah. I can't say I've got anything terribly positive to say about that. I guess it's
Yeah.
better to have, just broadly speaking, it's better to have good relationships with other countries than to have bad ones. But yeah,
Right.
for our good relations to be on the back of Trump getting a plane for himself, it's just fucking stupid.
Yeah. Right. It's the dumbest timeline, as they say. And I'm
Right?
struck by this too, because like Trump is like fucking over our real allies. Like
Yeah,
he's like
yeah.
feuding with Germany and France and NATO and the United Nations. He like doesn't give a fuck about the Baltic states and like, the Article 5 protection of everybody. But like Qatar, the size of Connecticut, we need closer ties with Qatar. Like how is that like pro America, this like Sunni like Gulf state that is Muslim of all religions that it could be for this like extremely xenophobic MAGA movement that fucking hates diversity and ethnic diffusion and religious tolerance. So that's kind of weird. But like meanwhile, like these giant allies that are giant economic partners and have real militaries, like Germany, Britain, France, Italy, Spain, like he's just beefing with them all if they don't go along with everything he wants. Like, Saudi Arabia is maybe, I guess Saudi Arabia is the weird one because of the oil supply and their ability to go along with us and fuck over China or Russia on a dime with like their oil output. But man, we've been trying to get out of the Middle East forever, and now Trump's becoming BFFs and like trading Europe for these teeny tiny rich. It's probably like it's all just he goes there and he sees the beautiful castles and gold everywhere, and he's just completely enamored that like, oh, France is a piece of shit. They don't have all this gold and this new oil money. They're like they're old pavos compared to these royal families that just steal all the resource wealth of their nations. But what do I know? I'm just a lowly writer.
Yeah, it seems pretty in line with Trump's general disdain toward democratic countries and general admiration toward more despotic ones. I can't say I know an enormous amount about the governmental situation in Qatar, but he is actively creating divides with the most flourishing democracies of the world with all these tariffs and whatnot in interest of what exactly? It
Yeah,
does seem
right.
pretty useful or useless and backwards.
Yeah. And I guess my last thought is kind of going back to domestic politics, but kind of back to that Puritan idea. But what do you make of the Democratic strategy of not even running Democrats and just having independents that kind of like will caucus with Democrats? So in Maine, you got that guy. What's his name? Do you remember his name? I should have written it down. But anyway, taking on Susan Collins. Although Democrats are fucking that one up because the governor, who's going to be like 82 or something, is now jumping into the primary. But in what was it, Kansas or Nebraska last election, they had a pretty strong candidate that got pretty close while being independent. You obviously have Angus King and Bernie Sanders up in New England. Is that a good strategy for Democrats going forward? Just say, hey, our brand is so toxic, we're not going to win with someone calling themselves a Democrat. Let's just have an independent that will talk shit on us and be a more moderate candidate, and hopefully they'll caucus with us, and at least it won't be a Republican that's like totally dependent on Trump's good graces and avoiding a negative tweet to just go along with anything he wants and says.
Independent used to be such a heavily stigmatized term but it's interesting as years have gone on and I've felt more and more issues with my own party. I don't identify as an independent, but I've kind of begun to drift away from calling myself a proud Democrat, at least. So
Yeah,
I
I
do
kind of
think
feel the same.
Yeah, I do think that there might be some real utility there, and it might be the
Yeah,
beginning of a two-party system beginning to break out. But at the same time, I think that the Democratic coalition is what matters most in the end, and whatever will get us to elect a sane president again is what
yeah,
is most important.
and have
I
majorities in the House and Senate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that I do yearn for the days when we can have a multiple party system and have them each be viable. But yeah, for the time being, I think that we just need to rally behind whatever damn sane candidate we
Yeah.
nominate in
Well, maybe
2028.
I think maybe it would even almost be like a political revolution in a way, like a way to get around like the constitutional reform that we need. But if Democrats maybe if both parties, and maybe you could have this reaction of like post-Trump or Republicans, or just like especially with the Epstein stuff, if that goes south, and maybe if both brands are just so toxic, if everybody just starts running as independents, maybe
Yeah.
that'd be a good way to end this like kind of really partisan like bullshit. Like stop giving all the power and control into the parties themselves. And like certainly that's certainly an originalist interpretation of how to govern, because this is kind of what the founding fathers intended at the beginning, just a bunch of independent people, no political parties, right? Like a lot of the Federalist Papers and George Washington's famous address at the end was like, no political parties, please. Let's keep that out.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of interesting. But on the other hand, it's like Democrats, shitting on people that don't have every single Democratic view. Like, wouldn't we be better off with Joe Manchin still in the Senate? Had he run again, even though he was very conservative, the most moderate Democrat, we had a fucking majority with Joe Manchin.
Yeah, that's I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a good amount. Thanks for hopping on, Ben. Thanks to everybody for listening. I guess I'll do a shameless plug. I do write comedy books. I've got Satire on the Trump years, Satire on the Biden years. If you love my comedy on the Halfway Cafe, I shit on Trump. I've been doing it for 8 years. So get a copy, keep reading our work, check out Ben's the Gen Z report. Any last minute thoughts for you, Ben?
I think that we had a really productive discussion. I wasn't sure if we were going to get to every topic, but
Yeah,
we did
I think
pretty
we
damn well
turned
tonight.
around American democracy, dude.
Yeah, we fixed it all. We're good.
Yeah,
No need to worry,
right.
guys.
Yeah. And thanks for the kind words, everybody in the comments. And we'll probably
Yep,
do this again before too long. Thanks for
yep,
listening, everybody.
yep. Thanks so much for tuning in. This has
Yep.
been a
Have a good
delight.
one. See you, everybody.